Once again, hola mi gente. Welcome to the Limbo Latino podcast. I'm your host with the most, Joseph Colon, aka the Limbo Latino, and I'm more than excited to introduce to you a trailblazer in the world of higher education. But before we start, make sure you do your homework, which is basically what? Make sure that you hit subscribe, like, and share all of this content. And make sure you comment too. I want to know how we're doing and wherever you get your podcasts, okay? So I'll be featuring in this whole episode, it'll be a video on the YouTube channel as well. So we'll make sure that we get the unedited version. You get full glory about what the content is about. And then you'll head over to the YouTube and make sure that you see the whole thing. All right? So please check it out there. This podcast was created to introduce you and to remind you of the beauty of the Latino AX story and the value you hold, and ultimately to help frame and reframe our history to the masses and hear it from the movers and shakers, known and unknown. And as I said, I have a guest who has been such a great advocate for students around the country and beyond. I'm happy to call her a friend and colleague. So yes, I am a little biased, but I can assure you that once you hear who she's about, her story, her philosophy, and really the work that she's been able to do as a higher education professional, you'll agree she is by far one of the most amazing folks on the planet. So on this episode, I'm interviewing Vice Chancellor for the Division of Equity and Inclusion at the University of California, Berkeley. Yes, in California, sunny California. Her name is Dania Matos, and she was awarded 2021's Top DEI Advocate by the National Diversity Council, and in 2020, she was selected as a Leadership Fellow by the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. And if the accolades don't really stop here, y'all need to check out her bio. And in 2018, she was named one of the top 25 women in higher education by Diverse Issues in Higher Education magazine. Her life's work has been around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she served all types of industries in her pursuit to have a direct impact around DEI initiatives. She has been Deputy Chief Diversity Officer at the College of William and Mary and served in the Virginia's Public Defender's Office. She holds a JD from the Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law, and a BA from Brown University. So I'm gonna bring her into the stream and into your ears. Hi, Dania, how are you?
Oh my God, your intro music had me like shaking. I love it. Thank you. And I'm always humbled by the words and the introductions. I'm doing well. Hola, mi gente. How are you?
Well, welcome to the show. And I'm so happy to have you as a part of this this first season. So
Is this season one?
This is season one. This is the beginning of the future. I just want people to get to know who you are. I'm really excited about having them learn about your trajectory and your story, really. And I'm just happy to see you, period. I can't wait to see you in person when this pandemic stuff is over. But I think just to kind of get us started, if you're ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, cool. So I'd like to start out our questions. Tell us your story. What is your story? And yeah, I'll just leave it there.
I love it. I know you said it's the most simplest question, and yet it's the question that's still being written, right? So many of our stories are being written, and I am so humbled for people like you who uplift the stories. What was struck about the introduction that you said is like the invisible stories, and there's so many of those that are out there. So I think of myself as someone who doesn't speak for others, but creates the room for their stories to be told and heard and all of those things. So my story, I was born in Puerto Rico, and I was born to an amazing single mother who ensured that she knew I was inheriting a struggle and that I had a responsibility to do something about the world I was inheriting. She also refused to let the world make her and her children feel less than. So my mom was very intentional about amplifying the parts of me that she knew the world was going to put down. And unfortunately, in this world, it's Blackness, right? So I identify as a Black Latina and Afro-Latina, and very proud of that. You know, the relationship of the United States and Puerto Rico is still a colonial one. So I knew my history from day one, right? And I knew about the colonial subjectivity, and I knew about the 1917 Jones Act and the real reason we got citizenship to go fight in the World War. And so I was so grateful to that. and to the oral histories of, my abuelita and all of that. And so my story is one of being very aware, being in demand for what I need, because that was kind of put in the womb. I always tell my mom, I was like, were you coaching me just like from when you were pregnant? Because I feel like I came out like super poderosa, and powerful. And really, as I navigate spaces of being the first or the only in rooms, right? I always walk into that thinking, do they see it? Because I notice it right away, right? You do that quick room scan of like, okay, at least for the visible identities, and then there's the invisible things. I've also had a trajectory, a different socioeconomic status. My family navigated houselessness and food insecurity and, all of the things that now I lead a division of students and being able to rectify the privilege of that. I remember when I was doing my introductory video to UC Berkeley, it was from one of our formerly incarcerated students. And he walked in with his camera, and I was like, wait, before we do that, I said the same question you asked me. I said, tell me your story. And he told me a story. And when I shared with him about the federal public defense work I did, he literally got emotional and was like, this is the first time I've seen myself in someone in your role. And so when I think of my story, I think of showing up authentically, letting people know that it's okay to show up with your hoodie and your hoops and you're still a vice chancellor, right? And all of those ways. So I think it's a story of authenticity. It's a story of making rooms for others to see themselves reflected in you and for realize that it's okay, especially when we're navigating worlds that weren't built for us. I talk about, I'm a legal scholar practitioner, and I was just speaking about the juridical history of this country, right? And if you think of the Constitution, it's we the people, but it's that constant defining of we the people was. And like, as you know, we were not the people. We were never the people. And so really thinking about that's so much of how this country was built, crafted, policies, practices, and even higher ed, right, is still sort of in that exclusive club of the academy. And so I'm a disruptor, dismantler of all those things and really ensuring that people are aware, right? Because that which divides us, and you check a box in this country and it allocates resources, but it also divides a people. So what would it mean if we got together in that collectivism and that cultural richness that I was born with? Right? I was born with, community and wisdom. I'm wearing my shirt today that says powered by buenas vibras and my ancestors, right? So I think about all the good vibes that I'm powered with, but also not only my ancestors, but the ancestors of which I will be one day, right? We're going to be somebody's ancestors. And I want them to be proud of what we did, who we were, how we showed up. Part of that is even like resting and setting boundaries and caring for, right? So it's not just do, but it's also modeling that for myself and my community. So it's still being written. Sometimes I have those moments where I sit and reflect and I'm like, oh my gosh, I did all that. Or when people are reading your bio and introducing you, you're like, who's that? Oh yeah, that's me, right? But there's so much more to that too. And so the beyond the bio moments and the moments people don't see are really the powerful ones.
Thank you so much. One of the things that, in bios are just a small part of who you are. I mean, just reading your bio, that was just a snippet. I think about your career and I think about all the things that since I've known you, I've also been in wonderment, also inspired by what you've been able to accomplish. So can you talk about your roles and what you've done, in the beginning of your career, and even maybe start off with this, who do you bring with you today? I mean, what those influences were and who they were and how they molded you into, what you would become.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I'm not shy about sharing. I'm a woman of faith, right? So I always think about my gifts and those talents and describing myself as multi-talented and multi-interested, right? So Brown was a place that, you can create your own major. You don't have to take things for grades. So it really allowed me to explore lots of different parts of me, and when I bring in the ancestors that I know and the ancestors that I don't know. I think I've shared with you that Roberto Clemente is my grandmother's cousin, an amazing baseball player, humanitarian, fighter for equity and justice without even kind of knowing it, and how he showed up, between the Negro Leagues and what it meant to be Afro-Latino before it was a thing in Puerto Rico. And so I remember seeing an exhibit of his in the African American Museum in Baltimore with my grandmother, and landing on that one exhibit, right? If you have an opportunity to do something in the world and you don't do it, you're wasting your time on earth. And I just sat and stared at that for the longest time. And I was like, I started crying because I was like, oh my God, Grandma, that's the blood that's inside me. That's what runs through me. That's the DNA. And so having her there, like in front of that and seeing who I am and how I've showed up in the world and how I think about how can I be of value and of service, not only to my communities, but to the world. It was just really powerful, right? So I feel like I never met him, but I bring him with me a lot, and so many others in my families who just were the first or navigated different spaces and places of doing that. Certainly my mother and my grandmother, right? Really powerful women who, again, refuse the world to say, women do this, you do that and all those things, and just defied it. I think of my mom having me at 20 and leaving Puerto Rico to finish college, to be an example to her 2-year-old daughter. Like, that takes some real courage, and I think of that and how that was my beginning, right? Those were my examples. And so that's really powerful. It's so interesting to think about career because so much of what I do is embodied into who I am. So I don't necessarily separate the two, right? They talk about the personal being professional and that vice versa. And it truly is. So for me, first, I wanted to pick a career that I could use my big mouth. I had a big mouth growing up. Like, yeah, I might have gotten in trouble sometimes for talking about, but why, mommy? And like stating my case. So it's only natural that like the law and becoming an attorney was absolutely my trajectory. Like, I was that little girl. And so I wanted to pick something that got me into good trouble. But beyond that, I saw the law as a place that was harming my community. I saw it as being really racist, structurally oppressive, and I wanted to translate it for my communities, right? And so I wanted to learn it, to change it, to transform it, right? And so I'm one of those, I'll try anything once and 4 times to make sure kind of people. I really knew that was a space to go on. So, for me, that naturally was kind of the trajectory. And Brown, right? Ivy League, I didn't know, I went to a high school and my counselors would tell me that was a reach, right? I'm like, all the schools I did. By the way, I got into a whole lot of Ivy Leagues. And so I went back and said, hey, look at this. But again, the world is really good at telling you what you're not. So I had to get really good at knowing who I was, whose I was, right? And having that really firm community in my family and otherwise, and building that space was really important for me. So my career was really that. The beginning, I'll be completely honest, I was helping my single mom raise my siblings. And so my first career choice was one that paid enough for all of that. Throughout college, I worked like 3 or 4 jobs. I remember studying for LSAT in the break rooms at the Gap at the mall, because that's the only time I had, and I think about privilege and resources and the fact that others didn't have to do it that way. There were moments where like I would get upset and be like, wow, like why, like I see people with all this free time. And then I was like, you know what, why not me? Like, there are lessons I'm learning in this. Who I am is, going to be changed in that. And, for me, I went to law school at night because I couldn't afford going full time and I was still helping my family. And also I really loved Catholic for the Innocence Project, right? And working on DNA exoneration for, people who were wrongfully convicted. To this day, I get letters from my clinic director saying, hey, remember that case you worked on like 15 years ago? They just released, or they just did that. So knowing that your impact, even that moment, even though you might not have freed someone, all that investigative work you did, all the uncovering of evidence. So that was like really the intentionality with that. And so, did corporate for a little bit. And for me, I always think of where can I make the most impact, right? And so from going from law into higher ed, I always say your journey only has to make sense to you, right? Because a lot of people were like, what are you, nonprofit, government, all these things? And I remember going into higher ed and one of the interviewers was like, well, you're not a traditional candidate. By the way, newsflash, don't ever use that. Traditional, normal, all that language, right, is really coded and embedded in whiteness and all the things we're trying to dismantle, right? And so my question back was like, well, what do you mean by that, right? And I was clear. I was going into that interview knowing everything that they would try to attack. And so I said, well, let me show you what I do have, right? Let's focus on the asset and not the deficit. And I was like, I've built programs from the ground up. I've, remade practice and policy and all those things, and they were quiet really quick, and I got the job, right? So I think of all those moments of, and how much like psychological coaching you have to do to yourself, right? Because the world doesn't do that, and the way we interview or the way we create opportunities, even the most well-intended, can be really harmful, right? And so I remember that interview. It was my first time having to do a job talk, and for those of all you all know, higher ed was my first career that you had to do like that. In the law, it's sort of search firms or you interview with a couple people and there are multiple rounds, but not on this scale. And I remember inviting my mom and abuelita to come, right? Thinking like, hey, come take a trip. It was really, I was scared and I needed my, my community. I needed my grounding there. They got a little trip out of it and they thought, but it was really like, I needed them there and I needed them like actually having my back. And so, going from the law where I saw, I went into public defense hoping for like to win and all those things and realized one less day in jail was a victory, right? And I was like, how do I get it so that they're not even confronting the system of oppression? And like the thread of most stories was lack of access, lack of opportunity, lack of someone seeing the greatness that I saw in them, right? Or no one even saw it. And so moving into another system, right, that also can be oppressive, but recognizing that that doesn't have to be the way. And so always being intentional about that. And now being at Berkeley, right, like sometimes I think about the #1 public research university thing, and sometimes I don't. But what I realize it's embedded into the eliteness and the incredible platform that there is, that what we do there really does transform the world and it's public good and all those things. And so just being my best self and being a valiant service, like I don't say, okay, well, this is #1, right? I think about how could we really be #1 in serving this? How could we really like be intentional in all those connections with the amazing students, faculty and staff and community that we have in all of that? And so what's next? I don't know. I haven't run for office yet. So shout out to the campaign, right? I feel like that might be in the trajectory. I was on Broadway when I was younger. So I really miss that creative part of me too. I bring it to every skill set though. Like I bring it to law, I bring it to higher ed, ask my teams, I'm always dancing on Zoom and, we're about to do a lip sync karaoke or something. So I find ways to bring it all together, all the different parts of me.
So you are a jack of all trades. This is the first time I've ever heard that you have all these aspirations of stardom. And I heard one of the parts of your explanation is serving people. And I think that the way that you lead has always been in that direction and that thought process. So I think any advice that you would give or any advice that anyone's getting from this audio or video is to say, as long as you're serving others, your success path is a great one. And because it fulfills you, it supports everything that you value. But I know at William and Mary, you were the first inaugural position there, firstborn, right? You have a lot of stuff happening with you that are firsts. Could you talk about maybe even that, that being put in that position, voluntary or involuntary, how did you navigate that and manage that to kind of create, sometimes recreating position or dismantling some of the systems?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I've never thought of being first. And this is my first non-inaugural role. I'm the 4th at Berkeley, right? And so it's so interesting because one of the things about being the first, and I think it has to do a lot with firstborn, is I always knew people are watching, right? My siblings are watching, people who you never even know or think are watching in moments, you don't know. Like I remember once I was nominated for a board because someone saw me at a networking event and were like, wow, that energy she's carrying. Like, I don't think I even spoke to them. And recognizing that even the way you navigate spaces, people are watching, right? And gravitates to. It's immense pressure too. I'll say that. I know earlier you were talking about serving this. I will say that making sure you pour into yourself first before you pull into others is so critically important. And I am still learning that absolutely every day. Follow the NAP ministry on Instagram. And so rest is a right. And I'm always telling my team that. So making sure you rest in this process, because serving others can take a lot out of you, right? Especially when you're confronting like these big systems. So I realized what I appreciate about inaugural roles is that like you get to create it, right? Like you get to define it for yourself and for others. You get to show them what it looks like. It is incredibly powerful, especially, at a place like William and Mary is the second oldest institution after Harvard, right? So I was creating something in the first and something that's been around for hundreds of years. And so Deputy Chief Diversity Officer there, Dania will always be the first to really set the tone of that. And then at UC Merced, I was also the inaugural Associate Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer at an institution. I felt like I went in a time warp that would only been in existence 15 years, right? So from 300 plus years to 15 and really setting that up. And now to be even the 4th at Berkeley at an institution that's also hundreds of years old, getting to to remake that. And part of it is also becoming very aware of what I carry and bring into it, right? Like, how can I think differently about it, right? How do I set it in a way? It's really hard to think about transformation for people when they're used to doing things a certain type of way, right? Like, this is the path to university president, or this is the path to CEO. If I followed that, I would never be in the spaces and places, you know? I've been in higher education for 4 years, and so many people are like, how did you do it? You're now at the number one place. And I was like, I never thought about it like that. I never said, I'm going to do this, and not knocking anyone who does, but I was like, where can I make the most impact? You know, coming to the UC was part of, honestly, the reason I chose UC Merced is that I had never been in an institution of students that were 70% Latinx. You know, I went to predominantly white institutions. I was like, wow, what would it mean to be that? And I looked at leadership, and there were none. There were no Latinx folks. I said, how are these amazing, incredible students, for which this institution was intentionally built for in the Central Valley of California, going to be what they can see? And that's what brought me there. Again, I wasn't thinking about the UC. I said, wow. And I remember the first time I walked across campus and I heard reggaeton and I heard, it was so powerful and beautiful. And I thought about my younger self, right? And being who she needed. And so now I got to be that for all of those people who are navigating the space and those things. And man, so much of my calls were informal, right? Students reaching out of like, I want to be like you. How do I? And I was like, no, you be you. But I'll share with you my story and like what I did and what I had to work through and how I had to get there, if it offers you anything. But you be you, because we need you in this world. And so for me, it's career and navigating choices. It's just following that inner compass and, you know, that heart work for me, because I talk about leading with love, right? And I talk about what that is. And that's what my life's work has been and who I am, leading with that love. And we don't use that. And I tell my folks, I love them all the time, right? And I was like, I love who you are. I love your leadership. I love what it's coming out in the world. And so the heart is full. And so really that's how I've navigated it.
So fast forward to your current position. What is it that you do there? What feeds you? And, you know, are your next, I guess, iteration of this position, what do you perceive as kind of like the challenges, but then also what are the things that you are looking for most forward to?
Gosh, so what I love about kind of leading this work is that no day is the same, and it's vastly different. And, you know, when you think about justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or whatever iteration of that you use, I'm definitely a justice framework. When I say that as an attorney, people are like, oh, the law. And I'm like, no. I'm talking about anti-oppression. I'm talking about liberation for all. I'm not talking about restorative justice or all those different pieces and elements, although that is very powerful too, and equity and all those things. So no day is the same, and my work is absolutely embedded into every fiber of the institution. I remember speaking to a mentor, and they said, I think that this position is what preps you most to be a president of a university, because you are in everything, right? From funding and budget to curriculum to student services to staff equity to all those things. And so I lead institutional strategy around that, but also sort of at the micro level of the interactions with people day to day. So I lead that transformative practice and the creating those spaces to do that. And I have those difficult conversations, and I have those emotionally laborious places, you know, from, you know, Ukraine to our undocumented scholars right now to navigating, creating things newly and kind of finding the funding for them. So the day-to-day looks so different, and that's probably part of why I love it. But the day-to-day is also very intense. And, you know, I always say my heart breaks into a million pieces in this work, and I put it back together every single day, every single time. But that doesn't mean a part of it isn't, you know, there or gone or impacted and imprinted. And so that same love means it all breaks and you put it back together. And I think even modeling that for the people watching is really important and vulnerable. And in the midst of that, right, I am granddaughter, daughter, friend, you know, sister, all of those things. And so this is a career and a path where you also get to frame it, you know, as you know, it's such a living work. Equity today looks different than equity tomorrow, right? We as a society, create the language associated with this work and all those different things. So it's hard to talk about specifics because, like I said, every day is so different, right? My division was the first in the University of California that began in 2007. And so now to sort of take it to the next phase of this work of what it looks like is great. We take on basic needs and, like I said, food insecurity and housing and in the Bay Area, which is quite expensive. So from taking it from the campus level to the influencing local, national, and global things is really powerful and important. And
so speaking about your higher education role in the future, what do you see this profession moving into, especially with everything that's been happening during the pandemic, even before the pandemic? Social justice movements and surrounding minoritized and marginalized communities, right? So where do you see your profession and the institutions of higher education taking the lead and or being a partner in creating equitable and inclusive environments?
Yeah, I think that there's such a big opportunity that could be missed, right, if we're not watching. I say that because, there's also the distinction of being educated in private institutions and now being at a public. I really feel strongly that piece of calling, that the public good, right, and what we're doing for the public and that collective approach. Not that it doesn't happen at the privates, but the accountability is so much greater, I believe, in the public space, and particularly the intentionality for which the California Plan on Education was built, right, to really kind of serve in all those different places. And so much in the pandemic has changed and forced many of us to do from, opening our eyes to iniquities, although many of us knew it all along. Look, when you don't belong and you're not part of that we the people, you're very aware of what that is. And while the world has us focus on what we didn't have, we need to be intentional and focus on what we bring and what we have. And that's where I think higher education goes, particularly as, right, we're talking about admitting more students, for underrepresented backgrounds and all those things. It's not thinking about we're letting them in, but what are we inviting in? What is this collectivism, right, that runs counter to colonialism and the individual pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, we are, X institution and look how great we are. So, one of the things is thinking about this notion of academic excellence, right? And how if a student is not doing well in the classroom, not what's wrong with that student, but what's wrong with our process, right? What's wrong with how we're teaching? What's like examining us instead of that piece. And so I think that the pandemic, right, caused so many in higher ed, one, to pivot online education. It's not just, hey, let me take my class online. That's a skill set. That's an expertise, right? And I feel like that's something that forced us to grow to tech inequities, right? And the different spaces and places that so many of us were navigating, myself as a caretaker and all of those things. And frankly, the reality that the pandemic health-wise was really tough for people, but it gave relief to some folks from racism, from macroaggressions, from things that they were experiencing in different spaces and places. So that recognition of like who we are, how do we build that belonging where we're affirming the full humanity of everyone and now more aware of what everyone is navigating. Because before it was like you went to work, people, how you doing? And the usual like, oh, I'm okay. And people didn't really care. I'm someone who actually answers that question of how you doing. And then people are like halfway down the hall before they're actually listening to my answer because they're expecting that, oh, I'm good or I'm okay. Right. But like I genuinely take interest in that and I answer it that way too. But now I feel like we've had more of a window into it of like, oh, they're not okay. Or I'm navigating, children, elderly, siblings, or frankly, houselessness, right? I don't even have Wi-Fi or like an outlet. And so there's so much that we can't unsee. And I think higher ed, particularly public higher ed, has a responsibility to transform that, right? And to say, it's okay to navigate this hybrid or all those different things. Or do we really need to do things that way? Is this that serious, right? Are we just holding on to it because we've done it for 100 years and no one's ever asked? What's the pathways for all of that? And so it's so much to think about. And it's going to cause some of us to give things up, even things up of comfort, right? Myself included. Okay, maybe it doesn't all have to be done that way, right? Or maybe these roles don't need to be there. What are the functionalities of this? Or how do we show up for each other, right? In the ways that truly matter. And for me, that's really thinking about that piece of it and affirming people. Partnership, right? Oh gosh, so many. Public private, I talked about that. I think there's so much of that. One of the things that I've loved about, well, I told you about my multi-talented, multi-interested brain. And so that brain has allowed me to craft a career in so many different sectors that the way I think about things and approach things is really bringing the best pieces of each to create something newly. I'm not wedded to a singular idea, let alone my own, right? I really think about how do we have that collaboration and spirit. So I think partnership is the key, and recognizing that even if you're at the top of the game, you have something to learn, right? And it might be a different institution. It might be a corporation. It might be a nonprofit sector. It might be that after school club in middle school that their students are doing some really bomb things. Like, I feel like the access of social media during the pandemic has also exposed us to that, of some things people are doing all around the world that never had that visibility. So that's been really great too.
So I appreciate you kind of framing that, because I think those are things, even thinking about people giving up stuff, that idea of having to let go of something, also understanding that there's also a way to fill that void that you might feel might be a deficit, right? Like, you actually may be gaining more than you actually are letting go, which is really a hard thing for folks who are in power and or in systems that allow them to be, privileged in that.
Yeah, I think of the story, like, I forgot what company, but the CEO who like reduced his salary to get pay equity, right? And really thinking about pay equity. But so it might be that, right? It might be giving up some of your own and all of those pieces as we think about that. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it might be giving up in the short term, but the long-term gains are far more than what you lose. I started my career making $34,000. And like, when I think about that in DC, I was just like, how did I live, right? And thinking about all that, I make $325,000 now, right? And I think that's important to share, because first of all, jobs need to be posting what the salary is and all of those things. And two, people go into it, and my stuff's online, so very public information. Yeah, it's public, right? But even that, I think it's really important, because I think that's also another system, right, that can keep us oppressive, especially for folks who that hasn't always been the case, right? Like I shared, I came from that and have not, but I remember one of my jumps tripled my salary in one move. And I remember like once getting advice of like, don't take a new job unless it's $10,000 more. And now I'm like, don't take a new job unless it triples your salary, right? No, but that's possible, right? And even those people coaching me didn't know that. And frankly, there needs to be some currency to the commitments of institutions and organizations in doing this work. Because if I equate the number of hours, emotional and otherwise, and right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's probably minimum wage, right? If I divide it all up. So I think, it's important to pay our people, right, for that serving. When you look at the most rich, right, I'm talking about the Amazon and whatever, one of the things is that they came from money, right? And I'm out here, we are out here just being the first. So that part of my legacy is part of that is learning so that I can build that for those after me, right? And what that looks like. So I keep saying to people, I was like, look, I want to be able to build a foundation that funds this work. That wealth building and that legacy building is part of that. So pay equity, yes, for all, especially
Definitely.
Women of color.
Especially women of color, yes. Mm-hmm. Well, not to transition, but what content would you recommend folks dive into?
Gosh, yeah. So my undergrad major was international relations, politics, culture and identity, and Latinx studies, right? So I kept every single one of my books. And I feel like remember how I had like that amazing education with my mother and grandmother and all those things? I felt like Brown just took it to, that level of like, here's the theory and the frameworks and the people around it, right? People don't know this, but I was also some people know this. I was a Mellon Fellow, which is to increase folks of color in getting their PhDs. And so like a lot of my summer research was around the colonial subjectivity of Puerto Rico and how had the highest poverty rates amongst Latinx folks, and yet we were the only U.S. citizens, and that direct connection. So I remember Pedro Caban and Constructing a Colonial People. That was like one of my favorites. I remember The Harvest of Empire, right? Also really transformed me. Elizabeth Acevedo's book about girl, right? That is right now. Latino USA, Maria Hinojosa is one of my favorite podcasts right now. And just her ability to tell stories. And Once I Was You was her book out. The classics of the house on Mango Street when I was Puerto Rican, all of those really kind of grounding words. Juan Flores from Bomba to Hip Hop, right? Of talking about the trajectory of music and all of that. And I've got a little Love and Rage by La Merced here too, that like I really love around my meditation and like that space, which is really, again, that caring for yourself. So important. Gosh, what else? I'm in the space of reading a lot of like articles and like emails because, faculty be writing like it's a dissertation sometimes. So I've got lots of books from them, but I think I'm unpacking that La Merced book to take with me. My sibling got me the Colin Kaepernick book on abolition for the people. So I'm going to check that one out. Yeah. So many. And what I love is that there's so many more authors coming out. One day I'll write one, right? Although I feel like I really want more of like a Netflix series right now, right? Because like when you're in this work, I don't know about you, but I watch a lot of mindless television, right? So really kind of love that and love what Latinx produced, Gentified, right? Like all those things that are coming out before that, one day at a time, right? Mm-hmm. Where we're really kind of seeing our stories and things like that. So that multi-talented, multi-interested is also a multimedia person, right? So like I read, I watch, I listen, all those.
All right. So we're at the end of the show. And I know it went by so fast. I'm actually was looking at the time and I'm like, wait, it hasn't been that long. I want to make sure that people get your parting words of wisdom, or maybe something great that you'd like to leave our familia with. Remember to follow us on IG as well. But most importantly, I want you to hear my sister's words on parting in the show, at the end of the show, and what she'd like to share.
Wow, I felt like I shared it along, but really encouraging people and reminding them that your journey is your own and you're writing it, right? That a lot of people are going to have to say a lot of things and it won't make sense to them, your family included, right? When I went into chief diversity officer, head diversity officer, my family was like, what is that? Like, why are you leaving a good government job for this? And now they are the biggest advocates and, sort of, are you at that protest? So again, even at home, I had to stand by, you raised me to create spaces for others. And like, this is what this is about now for me. And so you're going to change, like the people who are alongside you might change, right? And that's okay too, because you are constantly evolving and what you liked yesterday or were a part of yesterday might not be the same tomorrow. And so really, really stepping that and grounding yourself in that and not letting the world let you feel less than, or being really clear about who you are and whose you are is really, really powerful. And I always, you're going to have those moments, right? Listen to that inner voice. Like that really is guiding you. And if you don't feel right about something, don't do it. Like your gut will also check you. And so you've got a lot of people rooting for you, myself included. Even if we may never meet, please know that I'm out there, I'm cheering you on, and I see you. And I'm out here doing it for you, for us, for our community, because we're amazing. And no one's going to ever make us feel any less than that.
Yes. That's amazing.
I love that.
I know, right? I'm like, what
I need that in my life.
Where's the spotlight? Well, I want to thank you first and foremost for really providing us kind of your story, but also being a model and, just really, really, really setting the bar high and really being a beacon for a lot of people. I know that hopefully people will read up on you, follow your career, and then that one day that you're asking for some help and support in your campaign.
Donation.
Be like, we need donations.
To the foundation, right? Who knows?
Right.
I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah.
And again, that is our trajectory as people, right? We should always be able to pivot, move, and shake however we can. Use our voice, use our power, and being part of the Limbo Latino podcast.
I love it forever. I'm like so honored. Thank you for creating this space. And like, I think about it, there weren't these spaces before to tell our stories. So thank you for being amazing and creating that. And I look forward to forever being part of the Limbo Latino family and so many others. Now I need to go back and maybe we could do a gathering of like all of us after season 1, right? Like
we may have to do a conference of some sort. Maybe
there we go. I like that. That'd be great.
So with that said, that's the end of the show. Please follow Dania Matos. Thank you so much for being an amazing, amazing leader and a professional, but most importantly, being a great sister, daughter, and everything else to everyone. And if you didn't pick up anything from what she said, make sure you also take care of yourself. So that's also part of her mantra. And thank you, Dania, for being a great, great guest.
Thank you.
All right, my people, te veo, and I'll see you next time.
Ya tú sabes. Bye.